The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was beautiful. Lights of 1,000 colors floated in the air like tiny stars. Representatives from 12 star systems sat in their chairs, talking and laughing. They wore fine clothes and spoke in many languages. Translation devices turned their words into something everyone could understand. Una Park stood alone near the entrance. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. For 30 years, she had served as the human ambassador to this council. Before her, her mother had done the same job. And before that, her grandmother. 300 years of service. 300 years of humans helping, building, and hoping today. The council would vote on human membership. Again, Una had stopped counting how many times they had asked. 47 times, someone had told her. 47 times humans had requested the right to vote in this council. 47 times, they had been told no. She walked to her place at the center of the room. The other representatives looked at her with polite smiles. The Vila, with their silver skin and 4 arms, nodded kindly. The Kos, tall and covered in dark fur, barely glanced her way. The Thren, who looked like walking trees, whispered among themselves. High Chancellor Vethis raised his hand. He was an old Kos, his fur now white with age. His voice was deep and slow. We will now hear the request from the human delegation, he said. Ambassador Park, you may speak. Una stepped forward. She had given this speech many times. She knew every word by heart. Honored members of the Galactic Council, she began. For 300 years, humanity has served the 12 systems. We built the communication relays that let you speak across the stars. We developed medicines that saved millions of Voss lives during the Grey Plague. We stood between the Thren and the Kos when war seemed certain, and we found peace. She paused and looked around the room. Some representatives were already looking at their devices, bored. We have asked for nothing but respect, Una continued. We do not want power. We do not want control. We only want a voice, a single vote among many, the chance to be heard as equals. She finished and stepped back. The room was quiet for a moment. High Chancellor Vethis nodded slowly. Thank you, Ambassador. We will now vote. The voting took only seconds. Lights appeared above each delegation. Green for yes. Red for no. Red. 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 11. Red lights. One green light from the Vila, who had always supported humanity. The request is denied, Vethis announced. His voice held no emotion. Humanity has not yet proven sufficient contribution to warrant full membership. Perhaps in another generation. The same words they had used 50 years ago. Una bowed her head. I understand, she said softly. Thank you for your consideration. She turned and walked out of the Great Hall. No one tried to stop her. No one offered kind words. She was already forgotten. Just another small matter handled before lunch. Outside, sky was purple and filled with strange clouds. Una stood on the balcony and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth waited. Humanity waited. She pulled out a small device and typed 2 words. Begin protocol, Dandelion. She pressed send, far across the galaxy. Admiral Hong Kong sat in the command center of the carrier Jindo. It was humanity's largest ship, built in secret over 40 years. The Jindo could carry 10,000 people and enough supplies to last a century. When the message arrived, Han read it twice. His face showed nothing. He had known this day would come. They all had, send the signal, he told his communications officer. All channels. Every human in the 12 systems. The officer hesitated. Sir, are you certain? There is no going back. Han looked at him with calm eyes. There was never any going back. They made that clear today. The signal went out. It traveled through the quantum relays that humans had built. It reached space stations and colonies and ships. It found human doctors in Voss hospitals and human engineers in Kos factories. It reached teachers and traders and farmers and soldiers. The message was simple. Come home. Leave quietly. Take only what you need. Say nothing. On Station Meridian, Dr. Sora Beak received the message while treating a young Voss child. The child had been sick for weeks, but Sora had found a cure. The child would live. Sora smiled at the child's mother. "She will be fine now," she said. "Keep giving her the medicine twice a day." The mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, doctor. You saved her life. It's just doing my job," Sora said. That night, Sora packed a small bag. She left behind detailed notes for every patient, treatment plans, medication schedules, everything another doctor would need to continue her work. She did not say goodbye. She simply walked to the transport dock and boarded a ship heading toward human space. Across the 12 systems, the same scene repeated itself. Human teachers left lesson plans on their desks. Human engineers documented their projects carefully. Human diplomats organized their files and cleaned their offices. No anger. No protests. No demands, just silence. The next morning, the Vila delegation noticed their human translators were missing. They assumed the humans were sick or running late. They waited. The cost merchants found the human trade offices closed. The doors were locked. No sign explained why. The Thren tried to contact the human ambassador for help with a border dispute. No one answered. Days passed. Then weeks. Slowly, like a cold wind creeping through an open window, worry began to spread. Where were the humans? Why did no one answer their calls? What was happening? But by then, the humans were already gone. Their ships moved quietly through the darkness of space, carrying families and memories and 300 years of broken promises. Unipark stood on the observation deck of the Jindo and watched the stars slide past. Somewhere behind her, the Galactic Council continued, its meetings and votes and important business. She wondered how long it would take them to notice. How long before they understood. She closed her eyes and waited for the answer. 3 weeks after the vote, the problems began. Councillor O'Reel of the Thren Collective was the first to speak about it publicly. He stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, his wooden body creaking as he moved. His voice was like wind through leaves. "The quantum relays are failing," he announced. "Messages between the outer colonies are delayed by hours, sometimes days. Our engineers cannot fix the problem." "Hi, Chancellor," Vethis frowned. "What do our human technicians say about this?" Oriel's branches shook, which was the Thren way of showing confusion. "That is the problem, Chancellor. We cannot find any human technicians. They are gone." "Gone where?" "We do not know. Their quarters are empty. Their offices are closed. We have tried to contact human leadership, but no one answers." The council chamber grew quiet. Representatives looked at each other with uncertain expressions. A cost delegate named Vorath stood up. He was younger than most council members, with dark brown fur and sharp eyes. "This is not just happening to the Thren," he said. "The Cost Financial Network has been producing errors for the past week. Small errors at first. Now they are getting worse. The algorithms were designed by a human professor named Dae Kim. Our own experts cannot understand his code." "Why not?" Vethis asked. Vorath's ears flattened against his head. It was a sign of embarrassment among the costs, because we never asked him to explain it. We never thought we would need to. More voices joined the conversation. The Vela reported that 3 of their research stations had lost power. Human engineers had designed the power systems. The Voss said their food production was dropping because the hybrid crops required special care that only human agricultural experts understood. Vethis raised his hand for silence. "Enough. This is clearly a coordinated action. The humans are trying to force us to give them membership. It is a political game, nothing more." He turned to his assistant. "Send a formal message to the human embassy. Tell them we demand an explanation." The assistant bowed and hurried away. 1 hour later, she returned with a pale face. "Chancellor," she said quietly, "the human embassy is empty. The doors are unlocked. Everything inside is clean and organized. But there are no humans there. No notes. No messages. Nothing." Vethis stared at her. For the first time in many years, he felt afraid. On Station Meridian, the Voss medical director walked through the empty halls of the human wing. Dr. Sora Beak had been the best doctor on the station. She had trained a generation of Voss physicians. She had cured diseases that no one else could cure. Now her office was dark. The director found a single datapad on her desk. He picked it up and turned it on. Inside, he found hundreds of files. Treatment plans for every patient Sora had ever treated. Notes on each person's history, needs, and progress. Instructions for continuing their care. At the end, there was a short message. I am sorry I could not say goodbye. Please take care of them. They deserve to be healthy and happy. It was an honor to serve. No explanation, no blame, just kindness, even at the end. The director sat down in Sora's chair and cried, far away. In the cold darkness of space, the last human convoy was leaving the outer reaches. Captain Jin Cho stood on the bridge of his transport ship, watching the stars dot behind him. 100 other ships followed in a long line. They carried families, scientists, artists, and workers. They carried everything that 300 years of human presence in the 12 systems had created. Captain, his navigator called out, Kos border fleet is moving to intercept. They are ordering us to stop. Jin nodded calmly. He had expected this. The Kos ships were fast and heavily armed. They surrounded the human convoy like wolves, circling a herd of sheep. A harsh voice came through the communication system. Human vessels, you will halt immediately and explain your unauthorized movement. This is a Kos military order. Jin pressed the reply button. When he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. He spoke in perfect Kos, a language he had learned as a child on a Kos colony world. Kos fleet. This is Captain Jin Cho of the human convoy. We are not at war. We have broken no laws. We have violated no treaties. We are simply leaving. There was a long pause. Leaving. The Kos commander sounded confused. Leaving to where? Why? Home, Jin said simply. We are going home. You cannot just leave. You have responsibilities. Contracts. Agreements. Jin smiled, though no one could see it. All of our contracts have been completed or transferred. All of our agreements have been honored. We have left detailed instructions for everything we built. We owe the Galactic Council nothing. Another pause. Jin could imagine the Kos commander checking his legal databases, looking for some reason to stop them. Some law they had broken. Some treaty they had violated. There was none. You may proceed, the commander finally said. His voice was bitter. But the Council will hear about this. The Kos ships moved aside. The human convoy continued on its way. Jin watched the Kos fleet disappear behind them. He thought about all the years humans had spent among these stars, the friendships they had made, the children who had been born on alien worlds, the lives they were leaving behind. It hurt. It hurt more than he had expected, but he also thought about 47 rejections. About being told again and again that humans were not good enough, not worthy enough, not important enough. Some lessons could only be taught through absence. On the Council homeworld, in a small archive building, a woman named Minji Song was working late. She was supposed to have left with the others weeks ago, but she had stayed behind to finish one last task. Mingi was an archivist. Her job was to organize and protect information. For 20 years, she had documented every human contribution to the 12 systems. Every patent shared freely. Every disease cured. Every war prevented. Every life saved. Now, she was uploading all of it to the Council's public archive. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. File after file transferred into the system. Thousands of documents. Millions of records. The complete history of humanity's service to the galaxy. Let them see, she whispered to herself. Let them finally see what we did. When the upload was complete, Minji stood up and stretched. Her back hurt from hours of sitting. Her eyes were tired. She took one last look around the archive. Then she picked up her small bag and walked out into the night. The last transport was waiting for her at the edge of the city. She climbed aboard and found a seat by the window. As the ship rose into the sky, Mingy looked down at the world below. Millions of beings lived there. Most of them had never thought about humans at all. They would soon learn what humanity had meant to them. She touched the ring on her finger. It had belonged to her grandmother, the first song to work in the archives. 3 generations of service. 300 years of hope. Now it was over. Minji closed her eyes and let the ship carry her home. The human fleet moved through space like a river of lights. Thousands of ships, large and small, traveled together in the darkness. They carried nearly every human who had lived among the stars. Admiral Hong Kong stood in the command center of the Jindo, watching the fleet on his screens. Each small dot represented a ship. Each ship represented families, dreams, and lives being carried to a new home. "Status report," he said quietly. His second officer, a young woman named Hannah Lee, checked her screens. "All ships are accounted for, Admiral. No one was left behind. We have approximately 9 million people across the fleet." 9 million. It seemed like a large number. But compared to the billions who lived in the 12 systems, it was nothing. A drop of water in an ocean, that was the point. Humans had never been numerous. They had been useful. Han walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere far behind them, the Galactic Council was probably holding meetings about what had happened. They would be confused, angry, maybe even scared. Good. He remembered his grandfather's stories about the early days. The first human explorers had arrived in the 12 systems hoping to make friends. They had found a galaxy divided by old wars and older hatreds. The Thren and the Kos had been enemies for 1,000 years. The Voss were dying from diseases their own doctors could not cure. The Vila were brilliant, but alone. Unable to communicate with species so different from themselves, humans had changed everything. Not through force or power, but through patience and kindness. They learned every language. They studied every culture. They found ways to help that no one had asked for. A human doctor developed a cure for the Gray Plague and gave it away for free. Human engineers built the quantum relay network that connected all 12 systems. Human diplomats sat in rooms filled with hatred and somehow found paths to peace. And what did they ask in return? A voice, a vote, a place at the table 40-7 times. They were told no. Han's communicator buzzed. He looked at the message and smiled sadly. Another world had just reported that its power grid was failing. Human engineers had designed that grid 50 years ago. They had tried to train local workers to maintain it, but no one had been interested in learning. Now they would learn, or they would sit in darkness. On one of the smaller ships in the fleet, a teacher named Jisoo Park was helping children with their lessons. The classroom was cramped, and the lights flickered sometimes, but the children did not mind. They were used to difficult conditions. Teacher Park, a small boy, asked, "Will we ever go back?" Jisoo looked at him. His name was Minho, and he was only 7 years old. He had been born on a Voss colony world. It was the only home he had ever known. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not soon." "Why did we leave?" another child asked. "Did we do something wrong?" Jisoo knelt down so she could look at the children directly. "No, we did nothing wrong. Sometimes, when you work very hard for people and they don't appreciate it, the best thing you can do is walk away. Not to be mean, but to help them understand. Understand what? How much you mattered?" The children thought about this. They were young, but they were not stupid. They had seen things. They had heard their parents talking late at night about rejection and disappointment. "Will they miss us?" Minho asked. Jisoo smiled. "Yes, I think they will." Back on the council homeworld, High Chancellor Vethis was reading the archives that Minji's song had uploaded. He sat alone in his office, surrounded by screens filled with information. He had been reading for hours. His eyes hurt. His heart hurt worse. The first file he opened was about a man named Taewon Shin. Taewon had been an engineer on a Kos space station 60 years ago. One day, the station's reactor had started to fail. If it exploded, the radiation would have spread to the Kos homeworld. Millions would have died. Taewon had gone into the reactor alone. He had sealed the breach with his own hands, knowing that the radiation would kill him. He had saved an entire world. The cost had given him a small medal. They had never learned his name. Vethis moved to the next file. It was about a legal scholar named Narration. She had helped write the original charter of the Galactic Council, the rules that governed how different species worked together. The principles of fairness and cooperation. Natter had spent 10 years on that charter. She had traveled to every world, learning their laws and traditions. She had found common ground where none seemed to exist. When the charter was finished, she had asked for only one thing, that someday humans might have a voice in the council they had helped create. The council had thanked her politely and never mentioned her request again. File after file told the same story. Humans giving. Humans helping. Humans saving lives and building futures. Never asking for reward. Never demanding recognition, just hoping that someday they would be seen as equals. Vethis closed his eyes. He thought about the vote 3 weeks ago. He remembered how bored everyone had looked while Ambassador Park spoke. How quickly they had pressed their red buttons. How easily they had dismissed 300 years of service. "What have we done?" he whispered. His assistant knocked on the door. "Chancellor, the Thren are requesting an emergency meeting. Their communication system has completely failed. They are cut off from their colony worlds." Vethis nodded slowly. "Tell them I will be there soon," stood up and looked out his window. The city below was beautiful, filled with lights and life. But somewhere in that city, human offices stood empty. Human homes were abandoned. Human lives had been erased as they had never existed, and the council had done nothing to stop it, because they had not cared enough to notice. As Vethis walked to the meeting, past a small garden. Human gardeners had planted it a century ago. They had brought flowers from 100 different worlds and taught them to grow together. The flowers were still blooming, but soon, without care, they would die. Just like everything else the humans had left behind in the Great Hall. Representatives were shouting at each other. The Thren blamed the Kos for the communication failures. The Kos blamed the Voss for not maintaining the relay stations. Everyone blamed everyone. No one mentioned the humans. It was easier to be angry than to be shamed. Vethis took his seat and raised his hand for silence. The shouting slowly stopped. "We have a choice," he said quietly. "We can continue to blame each other, or we can admit the truth." "What truth?" a Kos delegate demanded. Vethis looked at him with old, tired eyes. "That we needed them, that we still need them, and that we drove them away." The hall was silent. For the first time in 300 years, the Galactic Council had nothing to say. 6 months had passed since the humans left. The 12 systems were falling apart. On the Voss agricultural world of Thala, the crops were dying. The fields that had once been green and full of life were now brown and empty. The hybrid plants that humans had developed were special. They grew faster and produced more food than any natural crop, but they needed careful attention. Specific amounts of water, certain minerals in the soil, a precise balance that only human farmers had understood. The Voss had never paid attention to how it was done. Why would they? The humans were always there to take care of things. Now, the humans were gone, and millions of Voss were going hungry. Governor Tyrell of Thala stood in his dead fields and tried not to cry. Around him, workers dug through the soil, hoping to find something they could save. They found nothing. "We have maybe 3 months of food reserves," his advisor told him. "After that, we will have to import from other worlds. But the prices are already rising. Other systems are having the same problems." Tyrell closed his eyes. He remembered a human woman who had worked these fields for 30 years. Her name was Yunji Kwan. She had been kind and patient, always willing to teach anyone who wanted to learn. No one had wanted to learn. Why did she never complain? Tyrell asked quietly. All those years working without recognition, why did she stay? His advisor had no answer. Far away on the border between Thren and Cospace, ships were firing at each other. The war had started over something small. a mining dispute on a moon that both species claimed. In the old days, human diplomats would have stepped in immediately. They would have found a compromise. They would have reminded both sides of the peace treaty they had signed 80 years ago, but there were no human diplomats anymore. The fighting spread quickly. Old hatreds, buried for decades, came roaring back. The Thren remembered ancestors who had died in Kos raids. The Kos remembered worlds that the Thren had stolen. Both sides had lists of crimes that went back 1,000 years, without humans to stand between them. The killing began again. On the Thren flagship, Commander Vorel watched his weapons tear through Kos ships. He should have felt proud. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt empty. His grandmother had told him stories about the Great War before the humans came. Millions dead. Worlds burned. Hatred so deep it seemed eternal. Then a human diplomat named Buang Ho Moon had arrived. He was not a soldier. He had no weapons. He had only words and patience. For 5 years he had traveled between Thren and Kos worlds, listening to both sides, learning their pain, understanding their fear. In the end, he had found a peace that no one believed was possible. Byung Ho had died of old age 20 years later. Both the Thren and the Kos had sent representatives to his funeral. It was the first time they had stood together without fighting, now that peace was gone. Byung Ho's work was being destroyed by people too angry to remember what war really cost. Vorel fired his weapons again and wondered if any of this was worth it. On the Council homeworld, High Chancellor Vethis spent his nights reading the archives he had started with the biggest achievements. The cured diseases, the prevented wars. The technologies freely shared, but as days turned to weeks, he began reading smaller stories. Individual lives, personal sacrifices. He read about a human teacher named Sujin Han who had spent 40 years on a Vela research station. The Vela were brilliant but cold, more interested in equations than emotions. Sujin had taught them something they had never understood before: how to laugh, how to play, how to enjoy life beyond pure logic. When she retired, the Vela had thrown her a party. It was the first party in their history. He read about a human engineer named Wanjin Kong, who had designed a water purification system for a dying Kos colony. The colony could not afford to pay him. He built the system anyway and trained local workers to maintain it. He never asked for money or thanks. 15 years after Wanjin left, the colony was one of the most successful in Kos space. They had a statue of him in their main square. He read about a human doctor, a diplomat, a farmer, an artist. Hundreds of stories, thousands of acts of kindness, and in all those stories, the humans asked for the same thing: respect, recognition, a voice. The council had said no. Again and again and again. Vethis put down the datapad and stared at the wall. He thought about his own life, his rise to power, the decisions he had made, the votes he had cast. He had voted against human membership 30 years ago. He remembered his reasons. Humans were too young as a species, too emotional, too unpredictable. They had not earned the right to sit with older, wiser civilizations. Now those older, wiser civilizations were tearing each other apart. They were starving in dead fields. They were drowning in problems they could not solve, and the humans they had rejected were gone. What did we think would happen? Vethis asked the empty room. Did we think they would serve us forever? Did we think our contempt did not matter? No answer came. His communicator buzzed. Another crisis. Another emergency. Another problem that no one knew how to fix. Vethis ignored it. He was tired of pretending that anything could be fixed. The damage was done. The humans had left not just their technology and their skills, but something more important. They had taken their hope. The 12 systems had always believed they were superior, older, wiser, better. Humans were useful servants. Nothing more, but servants do not sacrifice their lives to save your world. Servants do not spend decades teaching your children. Servants do not build you miracles and ask only for friendship in return. The humans had been partners, They had been family, and the council had treated them like tools to be used and discarded. Now the tools were gone, and the council was discovering something terrible. They had forgotten how to survive without them. In his dark office, surrounded by records of human kindness, Vethis made a decision. He would find the humans. He would go to them himself, if necessary, and he would beg not for their technology, not for their skills, not for their labor, for forgiveness, because that was the only thing that might save the 12 systems now. Not fixing the machines, or ending the wars, or growing new crops. They needed to fix what was broken in their own souls, and only the humans could help them do that. Vethis stood up slowly. His old bones ached. His heart was heavy. But for the first time in 6 months, he felt something like hope. It was not too late. It could not be too late. He would make them understand. He would make them see. And maybe, just maybe, the humans would come home. 1 year after the withdrawal, the Galactic Council finally found Earth. It had taken months of searching. The humans had chosen a distant corner of the galaxy, far from the 12 systems. A quiet place with a yellow sun and a blue world rich with water. They had found it using old star maps that predated their time among the Council. Hi. Chancellor Vethis stood on the bridge of the diplomatic ship and watched the planet grow larger through the window. It was beautiful. Green countenance, white clouds, blue oceans that sparkled in the sunlight. Around him stood representatives from every species in the council. The Vila, with their silver skin, the Kos with their dark fur, the Thren with their wooden bodies. Even the Voss had sent someone. They had come not as leaders, but as guests. Not to demand, but to ask. Open a communication channel, Vethis said quietly. The screen flickered, and a human face appeared. A young man with tired eyes and cautious expression. This is Earth Defense Station 7. Identify yourself. Vethis stepped forward. I am High Chancellor Vethis of the Galactic Council. We come in peace. We come to speak. We come to listen. Oh. There was a long pause. The young man looked at something off screen, then back at the camera. You may land at the following coordinates. Ambassador Park will meet you. The screen went dark. The diplomatic ship descended through white clouds and soft rain. Below, a city spread across a green valley. It was modest compared to the grand capitals of the 12 systems. Simple buildings, made of local materials. Gardens everywhere, filled with flowers of many colors. Vethis noticed that some of the flowers were not from Earth. They recognized species from Voss, Threnkos, and Velaworlds. The humans had brought them along and planted them in their new home. Even after everything, they had not wanted to forget. The ship landed on a wide field of grass. When the doors opened, Vethis was the first to step out. He blinked in the sunlight and breathed in air that smelled of rain and growing things. Ambassador Unipark waited at the edge of the field. She looked older than Vethis remembered. Her hair was completely white now and lines marked her face. But her eyes were the same, kind, patient, watchful. She was not alone. Behind her stood hundreds of humans, farmers and doctors, engineers and teachers, families with children who had never seen an alien before. They watched the council delegation with expressions that Vethis could not read. He walked toward Una, his old legs struggling on the soft grass. The other council members followed behind him. When he reached her, he stopped and bowed his head. Ambassador Park, he said. His voice was rough with emotion. We have come a long way. We have much to say. Una looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Walk with me. She led him through the city, past buildings where children played and old people sat in the sun. The other delegates followed, surrounded by curious humans who whispered among themselves. They came to a large garden at the center of the city. Stone benches surrounded a quiet pool of water. Trees from a dozen worlds provided shade. Una sat down and gestured for Vethis to join her. 1 year, she said softly. Longer than I expected, shorter than I feared. Vethis sat beside her. We had to learn, he said. It took time. What did you learn? The question was simple, but Vethis understood its weight. He thought carefully before answering. We learned that we were blind. We saw humans as helpers, not partners. As tools, not family. We took everything you offered and gave nothing back but rejection. He paused and looked at the water. His reflection stared back at him, old and tired. We learned that power means nothing without wisdom. Technology means nothing without kindness. Civilization means nothing without respect for those who build it. Yuna waited. We learned, Vethis continued, that your silence was louder than any war. You did not fight us. You did not threaten us. You simply left. And in your absence, we finally saw how much you mattered. A Vila representative stepped forward. Her silver face was wet with tears, something Vethis had never seen from her species before. Why did you not fight? She asked. You had every right. We treated you badly for centuries. You could have demanded justice. Instead, you just left. Yuna stood up and looked at the gathered aliens. Some were crying. Others looked ashamed. A few still seemed angry, though at themselves or the humans, Vethis could not tell. Because, Yuna said gently, war would have taught you that we were dangerous. It would have given you a reason to hate us. A story where you were victims and we were villains. She walked to the edge of the pool and looked at the sky. We wanted you to understand something different, something harder. We wanted you to see that we had value, that our absence had weight, that losing us meant losing something precious. She turned back to face them. You cannot teach that lesson with weapons. Only with silence. The garden was quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Vethis stood. His legs shook, but he forced them to hold him. Slowly, carefully, he knelt on the grass before Yuna Park. Behind him, one by one, the other representatives did the same. The proud Kos, the ancient Thren, the brilliant Vela, the gentle Kos. All of them kneeling before a small human woman with white hair and kind eyes. We are sorry, Vethis said. We cannot undo what was done. We cannot give back the years of pain. But we can promise to do better. We can promise to listen. We can promise to see you as you always deserved to be seen. Yuna looked at them for a long time. The humans behind her watched in silence. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, tired but real. The door was never closed, she said. We left it open on purpose. We hoped you would come through it someday. She reached down and took Vethis's hand, helping him to his feet. Welcome to Earth, she said. Let us talk about the future. In the years that followed, things changed. Slowly at first, then faster. Humans returned to the 12 systems, not as servants, but as partners. They rebuilt what had broken and healed what had hurt. The Galactic Council created a new seat, not just for humans, but for the idea that all species, no matter how young or small, deserved a voice. And in the archives of the Council, historians finally completed the title of the Great Withdrawal. For a year, it had remained unfinished, a question without an answer. Now the answer was clear, without making a sound. Humanity withdraws, and the Council understands its worth. On Earth. In a small garden, an old woman named Yuna Park tended her flowers. She had retired from diplomacy years ago, leaving the work to younger hands. Now she spent her days in the sun, surrounded by plants from 100 worlds. Sometimes children came to visit her. They asked about the old days, about the council and the withdrawal and the long silence. She always told them the same thing. We did not leave to punish them. We left to teach them. And sometimes the best teacher is not someone who speaks. It is someone who steps back and waits for others to learn on their own. The children nodded, though they did not fully understand. Someday they would. Someday they would face their own challenges and remember her. Words. Yuna smiled and returned to her flowers. The galaxy was healing. The silence had done its work, and humanity, quiet and patient as always, helped guide the way forward.